to your first technical interview.
Yeah.
How did that go?
A match for the mindset and the way that companies like to operate.
Piece of advice on the day of his interview.
You don't spend your time hiring amazing people and then tell them what to do.
An evolution from hiring coders to hiring builders.
In brand new ways with AI, you've created something magical.
Foster this culture, to champion this.
Believe in the cause and start acting that way.
Hi, welcome to the next episode of NextGen Talks. My name is Aurobindo. I've been a software engineer at Intuit for around 5 years.
I'm Swastika. I've been a software engineer at Intuit for the last 2.5 years. Today, we have a very special guest with us. It's our very own CTO and Executive Vice President, Alex Balazs. We're really glad to have you here.
It's fantastic to be here. I'm very, very excited. Thank you for having me.
Alex has played an instrumental role in our company's success, spearheading teams across the globe to build a world-class AI-driven expert platform that's powering prosperity for millions of customers around the world. So we're really excited. How has Bangalore been treating you so far?
So far, so good. I always love my trips here to Bangalore. I think I was trying to remember, it's like my 14th or 15th trip here to Bangalore. First one was like 2004-ish, something like that. And so with every trip, I really enjoy the people that I meet and all the great work that's going on here. I'm just sad at the end of a trip that I, have to leave, and as opposed to just hanging out here more with all of you.
So it's been around 25 years since you've been at Intuit, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about technical interviews. So right now, I think the tech companies, they have a very standardized interview process.
Mm-hmm.
We test for craft skills, data structures, algorithms, operational excellence, and so on. Looking back to your first technical interview, How did that go?
It was very different for sure. We've become significantly more structured in the interview process. The interview process when I went through it was about really talking through the history of what it was that you worked on. It was much more based on, hey, I see on your resume you worked on product X or in this language. Tell me about a problem that you solved, or tell me about a time where you had to make a choice about what language you wanted to use, or something like that. So it was very different. I actually think that the right answer is probably in the middle somewhere. And in fact, I like our interview process in terms of D4D, because part of it is a very structured interview and making sure that you actually understand the concepts and data structures and all that kind of stuff. But then part of it also is the match. I think cultural match, a match for the mindset and the way that companies like to operate is really important. It can't just be a kind of do you textbook know what you need to do? It's also, would you be a good match in this company? And so I think there's probably a little bit more on the are you a good match side back when I was interviewing so long ago. And so it has changed quite a bit.
So if you were able to travel to the past and give your younger self a piece of advice on the day of his interview, what would that be?
Be bolder. Stop doing what you're told.
Do you think that would apply currently too?
Absolutely. The thing is that, and actually I love these little mini vignettes of Steve Jobs. And one of my favorite vignettes that he has is, you don't spend your time hiring amazing people and then tell them what to do. Like, what's the point of hiring an amazing person if you're going to tell them what to do? So what do? You hire great talent, you create a great environment, you give them context, and then you have them be the amazing people that you want them to be. And I think that there are moments in my career where I distinctly remember a junior engineer, my leadership says, go do this. And I was like, wow, that's a horrible idea. Okay, I'll go do that. And why is that a good thing to do anyway? But then B, it limits your career, it limits your growth, it limits your, many things. And so, I, like many engineers, was very, very introverted growing up, very introverted. And I think one of the reasons maybe we love being software engineers is because we just get to collaborate with a computer, because maybe we're not so good with other people. But over the course of time, as I kind of grew into my personality and grew into my confidence and things like that, you begin to understand, wow, the power of no, the power of saying, I have a different opinion, the power of saying, hey, let's talk about this. I wish someone had told me that sooner. That being said, I think things have worked out pretty well for me.
That's nice. So one thing that stood out to me from whatever you just said is an evolution from hiring coders to hiring builders.
Yes.
And today we get to hear this a lot about the builder culture at Intuit. So What does that look like in action? Like, let's say there's a software engineer in any company across the world, and they want to put the builder culture that we foster here into action. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start answering that question saying that I think there's some beautiful symmetry to the fact that, okay, I'm going to date myself. In 1983, I was 12 years old, and my parents signed me up for a programming class, and I fell in love with software. In 1983, Scott Cook founded Intuit. And I feel like I had an apprenticeship for the next 20 years and then eventually, crossed over and got the privilege to work for Intuit. Why is that important? Because Scott Cook founded Intuit because he was solving a very important customer problem. And it was a customer of one, and that customer of one was his wife. And when you talk about builder culture, the first instinct is to say, wow, this is something new. And in reality, for Intuit, it's not something new, because what it means is you actually understand your customer. You bias towards learning from your customer as fast as you can, which means if I've got some kind of big thing I want to do, what's the smallest thing I can do and show it to them? And then get feedback, and then iterate, and then leverage AI and use AI to make that experience better and to do a done-for-you experience. And then you say, boy, wouldn't it be great if I have amazing platform capability and I can make a lot of progress because I can leverage the primitives, all these capabilities, and actually weave them together in brand new ways with AI and iterate with the customer and sweat the details and fight for every inch. And then you've created something magical, absolutely magical. So any company out there that wants to create kind of this builder mindset, the builder culture, it is about exactly that. It's about understanding who your customer is, knowing that AI can create a done-for-you experience, and then leveraging the power of a platform, because you can stand on the shoulders of giants. So you don't have to build it all. You can leverage thousands of people or hundreds of people, or maybe just one person who has created something great, and you can create something even greater on top of that.
What's interesting to me is, I think it's a pretty difficult endeavor to influence and change engineering culture, especially in huge companies. So what steps have you taken, or has Intuit taken, to foster this culture, to champion this in the last year?
Yeah, boy, another really great question. When I first started thinking about engineering culture, which was probably 8-9 years ago, well before I became CTO, I started to break it down and say, well, engineering culture, it's a culture. So I just started to study cultures. Like, what do cultures do? And then you learn that cultures have reward systems. Cultures have rituals. Cultures have learning and education. And that's how cultures are created. That's how they're reinforced. That's how they're refined. That's how the best of a culture kind of rises to the top, and how certain behaviors are rewarded and others are maybe not so rewarded, right? And so I said, wow, so, if we truly want to move towards a unified engineering culture for the company, we have to think of it like a culture, like, countries have cultures. And so then I said, okay, what's kind of that next step? So you think about rituals. Well, what are some of the rituals we have? Global engineering days, right? So you create global engineering days, and you use it not just as a mechanism to create space for engineers to work on projects they really care about. It is about that, but it's also an opportunity for us to use this ritual to reinforce the culture that we actually want. And then you say, well, we have incentive structures that are built into us as a company. Things like the rubrics that we use to actually interview people or evaluate for performance or evaluate for promotion. So how do you make sure that you use the rubrics to reinforce the culture that you want? And then the final thing that you do is that you make sure that one of the ways that you reinforce the cultural changes that you want is you find influencers who basically believe in the cause and start acting that way. And so, for example, with builder culture, it wasn't about necessarily trying to transform the whole company at once. It's like, let's create one team that behaves that way. And then let's create a second team, and then a fifth team, and then a 10th team. So these are the things, the tools that I've used over the years around the rituals that we do, the incentive structures that we have in place, and then the specific champions for the changes in behavior. And it's amazing what you can do when you combine those things together.
Got it. So a really conscious effort to get this culture in place. Which makes me curious. Let's say for a listener who's tuning into this podcast, they want to start imbibing the builder culture at their own company tomorrow, and they're just an engineer. What can they start doing right from tomorrow?
Well, first thing is they're not just an engineer. We feel that way when we're in the job, right? But I go back to a story where I was tailing around with Mariana a couple of years ago, and she was meeting with a couple of engineers, and one of the engineers told her the quality of our code isn't where I'd like it to be. And she said, well, why is that? And she said, well, because we didn't write the automated tests. She said, oh, why didn't you write the automated tests? She said, well, the product manager didn't give me the time to write the automated tests. She said, whose hands are on the keyboard? And the engineer said, mine. And she said, sounds like you should be writing automated tests, right? So the reason I bring that up is because although it may feel sometimes as an engineer that you're not actually in that position of authority to do what you want to do the right thing, to be the culture you want to be, you are actually, in fact, in the exact right position to do it. So if you're that engineer at this company, at any company, and you want to start to exhibit this type of culture, you live the culture. And you live the culture even when it's hard, because people will see that by doing that, it gets better. And what you'll see is you do it, then somebody next to you will start doing it. And then somebody on the other side starts doing it. Then suddenly your entire team is doing it. Then suddenly the team next to you is doing it. And boy, these grassroots efforts, it's like wildfire. And it can start with absolutely just one person.
So it seems like there's a heavy leadership component to this as well, right?
Absolutely. And we're all leaders. Yeah. We're all leaders. Go ahead.
Courage. I like that reminded me of courage. It's one of the Intuit values that, we've been encouraged to imbibe from day one itself. So
absolutely.
As you said, be bold.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to be bold. And I know it's hard. It's like the hardest thing to tell a frontline employee, be bold. Well, it's easy for you to say, you're the CTO of the company, right? But it is this boldness in which you can bring the best of who you are. And you'd be amazed at the times where you exhibit the boldness, you exhibit your opinion on things, and almost all the time it actually works out. And yet you can spend so much time worrying about it and saying, oh, should I really speak up? Should I really be bold? But then you do it and it works out. And then you do it a second time and it works out. And then you get addicted to it and you just keep doing it. And it's just this beautiful thing.
I think one interesting part of this is you've been an individual contributor for a lot of time.
A long time.
And then you were thrust into leadership.
Yes.
Do you believe that in hindsight, you were exemplifying this builder culture and that's what got you to this position?
I hope so. It's important for everybody to know there isn't just one path to the place that you want to get. And I think when you look at things from the outside in, sometimes it seems like I have to make this exact right choice at this exact moment in my career. Otherwise, I'm destined to only go here, or I'm destined to go, and none of it is true. None of it is true. Like, as you said, I basically fought leadership positions for the longest time. And I did because, I was in leadership positions, but I didn't want people leadership positions. Early on in my Intuit career, I became addicted to boundaryless leadership. This idea of unbelievable collaboration, this idea of leading across boundaries, that you don't have to have people report to you for you to be able to influence them with good ideas. It was a great way for me to practice being bold, taking chances, trusting other people, being vulnerable. All the things that you think you're not supposed to do at a workplace are the things that actually get you to the place where you want to be. And so, yeah, I think I exhibited a lot of these behaviors and grew my leadership acumen, grew my confidence, grew my ability to communicate. And then certainly as I got later on into a career and I started working for Mariana was the CTO. And there was a moment in time where she basically said, all right, Alex, I've had enough. You're too good of a leader. I'm giving you teams. And, at that point I said, okay, yes, this is the right point for me to lean in. And, it turned out that the bug around people leadership was as strong and the desire was as strong as it was around being an individual contributor. And I couldn't be happier with the path that I've taken.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. And one key word that I often notice in your in this whole conversation is growth.
Yeah.
And how that's such an essential aspect to how we navigate our careers going forward.
Yes.
It's always change, always growth. But I want to step back in time a little. So when I talk to my father, right, he tells me all these stories about how they used to watch TV at a neighbor's house because at that time television was not something which was very accessible to everyone around me. When I was growing up, however, for me, a computer has been as essential a household item as a washing machine, for example. So what was your earliest tryst of technology, your earliest memory of technology?
Earlier on today, I was joking with some folks that I'd be sharing with the two of you that I wrote code on stone tablets, but that's not true. Boy, earliest view of technology. I remember watching TV and it was an antenna and there were like 3 stations, and then cable TV came out and it was like the biggest thing ever. Oh my gosh, we have like 100 TV stations. It was just 100 times more bad things, uninteresting things. But there have been so many. I do though think that one of the biggest ones is the mobile phone. It's funny. My son, when he was probably 5, 6 years old, asked me, Papa, how old were you when you got your first cell phone? And I said, 26. And he said, why didn't you get one sooner? And I said, because they hadn't been invented yet. And just the mobility that you get and the connectivity that you get from the mobile phone, and how it led to things like, growing up and you pick up the phone and almost every phone call you made was, you had to pay extra for it, like long distance fees. And now you think back on some of this stuff, it's just crazy. One other moment that I just thought of is I was a freshman in college and sitting down in a Sun Vax terminal, and I sent an email to a friend of mine a couple 100 miles away. And then he sent me an email back. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is so cool. And I thought to myself, oh, somebody's got to send me a bill. Like, there's no way that this is going to be free. So just, every single one of these tiny technology innovations, like the birth of the internet and email and all these things, cell phone, all of them just become, to the moment when you go through it, it's this amazing thing. And then suddenly it just becomes commonplace.
That's so amazing. And what an amazing journey, honestly. Like, computers were around when I was born, but yet I remember the first time we got our internet connection at home. The whole idea of Wi-Fi, it held us. It was amazing. I can still recall the awe in which I was held. But this brings me to the next question, that we've been through all of these disruptions, so to speak. There was the radio, television, web, mobile, DOS. We are in the age of AI now. There is a lot of innovation that is happening simultaneously, right, in the world of computer science and technology. Yet, none of the other innovations have had such a spanning effect as GenAI has had. So my question is that, what is it that defines a disruption? It's not just amazing technology, as we can see. It's something which is, there's more to it.
And how do you predict that one's about to happen?
Yeah.
Like, are there factors economically, socially, culturally?
Disruptive innovation is an interesting thing. I read a couple of books on it several years ago, and there's 2 kinds of disruptive innovation. The first kind is you do A well, and someone else does A better, and they disrupt you. And that one, when it happens, you can compete because you can say, no, I'm going to do A better. The second type of disruptive innovation is you do A well, someone else does B well, and by doing B well, it makes A obsolete. And that's when it's like scary, right? And the best moment of this I ever saw was I was at reInvent, the AWS conference, and up on stage, this was probably, 7, 8 years ago, up on stage, you had somebody from AWS and somebody from Intel. And the person from Intel said, I'm so proud that Intel is the processor that's running inside of AWS. On the cloud, it doesn't matter what the processor is that runs. It's irrelevant. And you signed your life and coupled yourself to the instrument of your destruction. So they did processors well. Amazon said, on the cloud, who the processor is doesn't matter. The hardware doesn't matter. That is disruptive innovation, right? And the reason why generative AI has been such a huge disruptive innovation is because in terms of a computing paradigm, the interface to it is just human language. AI was disruptive, sure, but you have to go to school for 8 years, 12 years, get a PhD, learn this, learn that, to actually truly be able to leverage AI. In generative AI, suddenly everyone can leverage AI. So it's a huge, huge disruption. And that's usually when these disruptive innovations happen, is when you completely change the paradigm. So when you go from a landline to a mobile phone, suddenly the paradigm has changed. You can walk around. Why would anyone want to take a phone call at home when you could basically do it anywhere, right? Why would anyone want to do AI the other way? It's still required, to be clear, when you can do it in generative AI, right? We can do it through a human interface. And so the way that the only real avenue to have to predict which innovations will be disruptive is to think of the ones that are actually driving some type of paradigm shift. And when you can see some kind of paradigm shift, then you say, oh my gosh, like this is a game changer, right? So it was pretty obvious to see early on, for example, with Uber, that says, oh, with Uber, I can just on my phone find a car and pay for it. And I don't have to worry about all the things of like finding a taxi and then paying the driver and worrying about how much I tip. And is the taxi driver going to be upset at me if I don't tip them enough? With Uber, they completely changed the paradigm. And so these things that when you're really observant and you kind of look around, you can see these moments where you say, oh my God, that's like a complete paradigm shift. And those are the ones that are the disruptive innovation.
Yeah, I think personally too, I got my first mobile phone when I was in 10th grade.
Yeah. And
I can feel the difference before that and after that.
Yeah.
It feels like a huge change in my daily life.
Yeah, it like changes how everything about your life, right?
Exactly.
And that's what these disruptive innovations do.
So with this in mind, with the current disruption that is AI, it feels like we're in the midst of a paradigm change, right? What's your vision of what we will look like in the next 5 years?
My gosh, 5 years in Gen AI time is like 100 years. It's really, really difficult to predict. That being said, let me try anyway. Already with the way that the technology is being applied, we are moving, I'm so proud that Intuit is on the forefront of basically going from easy to do it yourself to we do it for you. I think we're really on the forefront on that. And so what you're going to see in the next 5 years is a greater and greater emphasis on tasks being done for you. And if you haven't seen, for example, some of these videos of the robots that are about to come out, Tesla has one, there's 2 others that I saw. So there'll be 3 different companies next year that are shipping a home robot for $16,000 to $20,000 that will do your laundry, do the dishes, and do other basic tasks. That's unbelievable, right? Literally, we went 5 years ago to barely being able to create any type of robot that looked humanoid at all, to now generative AI and modern robotics, and you're actually going to have these things in your home. And so that's just one example of the done for you experience. But now think about everything that we do. Think about accounting, payments, payroll, personal finance, credit, tax, all these things. It is almost impossible to conceive that every single thing that Intuit does today would not completely be done for the person on their behalf. 100% of them, not 50%, not some smaller percentage, 100%. So if we're doing that, imagine what everybody else is working on. And so, one of my favorite movies that I was watching with my son when he was a little boy was WALL-E, the robot WALL-E. And in that movie, there was this vision of these humans sitting in these seats with like the VR thing on. And we laugh, we're like, ha, 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 that's never gonna happen. And now you look at that and you're like, was that a prediction of the future? Right? Because Elon Musk actually asked this question too of when suddenly the robots are doing everything for you, like, what are you going to do with your life? What's your sense of purpose? And so that's a philosophical question that's probably left for a different day. But I do think for the immediate term in the next 5 years, our ability to not just better the lives of us, but I think one of the great aspects of it is that I think it's going to end up being a great equalizer society-wide, that we're actually going to be able to hopefully raise the standard of living for everybody, because the cost of these technologies is going way down and their applicability in terms of done for you is going up. So hopefully you can get to the point where you've raised the standard of living for nearly everyone, everywhere. And so I'm an optimist, like I'm a very optimistic person, but still, if I try to think about this very pragmatically, I think it's going to be a powerful next half decade of done for you experiences at extremely low cost that really will be the betterment of society. Once we come out of that on the other side, then we'll probably get into some of these philosophical questions of, well, how much will it really end up doing?
Completely agree with you on that, on the optimism angle of it. And I mean, history speaks for it, right? There was a lot of apprehension during the Industrial Revolution when the machines came up.
Yeah.
But look at what they've done to us today. They have empowered us in more ways than one. So when I'm very optimistic about how AI will shape our lives.
However, yeah, I do think, as you said, the pace of AI is exponential. And sometimes for developers and for people in general, this can be a daunting idea, right?
Yeah.
In terms of meaning, purpose, or work. Do you have advice for young developers to navigate through this disruption and like thrive?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely can be scary. I had a great conversation this morning with some early career engineers, and one of the questions that came up was around, what is the future of software engineering? What is the future of all of our jobs, right? And, I told them, is there a time, sometime in the future, where you need to worry about this? Absolutely. Is that time today? No. Is that time 5 years from now? Highly unlikely. There's still going to be a need. Like when the cloud came out and we started deploying things in the cloud, there was this belief that, oh, you don't have to understand how the infrastructure works anymore. Yeah, you do. You still have to understand how the infrastructure works. Amazon does it for you, but you still have to understand how it works as an engineer. So I think all these skills and the mindset and the problem solving still needs to exist. That being said, it does feel scary. It does feel daunting. And the best way that I can kind of maybe create an analogy for this is that if you're in the ocean, when there's some huge wave coming at you, it's scary. If you got a surfboard and you're riding that wave, it can be a lot of fun. So my advice for all the engineers out there is ride the wave. Ride that wave of technology innovation. It's going to be a fun ride. And where does that ride end? Where does it turn into something that maybe is not so fun? It's really not worth worrying about. At this point, let's enjoy the ride.
Pretty great advice.
What is that surfboard for us?
What is it? Well, the surfboard is what you talked about. It's that learner's mindset, right? It's another thing we talked about this morning. People ask me, they said, boy, sometimes I'm in a meeting or I'm talking with someone and they just seem like they're so much farther along than me. And I'm feeling like I'm being left behind, or I have like this imposter syndrome. And they're like, Alex, have you ever had moments like that in your career? And I'm like, I have moments like that now, right? But what do you do? The question is, what do you do with that feeling that you've got? And you can turn that into the energy. You turn that into the power. You turn that into the desire to actually ride that wave, to learn, to hire amazing smart people, to talk to amazing smart people, to read as much as you can, to inform yourself, to play around with technology, to constantly push yourself. And I mean, if you think about it, there's a reason we all became engineers. There's a reason why we all got into this field. Some of this is just intrinsic in us, that we love to be pushed hard. We love to test the boundaries of things. And sure, historically, it was at a pace that was a little bit more controllable, and now it feels at moments like it's almost out of control, but this is who we are. This is what we do. And so it's that learner's mindset. The surfboard is, if you've got a learner's mindset, you're going to ride that wave.
We'll take that to heart.
Yeah.
Getting to the next section, now that you're a CTO, do you still code? Do you still review codes?
I do code at home. I don't officially do code reviews, but there are moments where I sit down with engineers and I review their code. I take a look at their code. I don't write production code anymore, but I still code at home. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about your side projects at home.
Right now, what I'm doing is, not surprisingly, in the AI space. So I'm looking to set up a system so my wife is a fantasy fiction author, and so there's a lot of data that comes in from her business. So I'm working on training LLMs and setting up a RAG database so that we can actually query all the data that we have about the business and actually have amazing dashboards so that we know what to do next. So that's kind of the current coding project that I've got right now.
We have a fun little exercise for you.
Okay.
There's a bit of legacy code with an Intuit that we'd like you to give a quick code review on.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, it's basic Java. It's a purge utility for files.
Okay.
Any thoughts? It's a little dated, I'd say.
Is it a little dated because I wrote this code?
You got it.
I actually looked familiar when I first looked at it. Like, this looks like some of the old QBN codes.
So you remember what it does? Okay.
Yeah. Because back at the time, there actually wasn't a utility in Java to basically delete an entire tree structure.
Okay.
So I actually had to create code. And I remember, the reason I remember is I remember obsessing over this code to basically make it as few lines of code as possible. Like when I first wrote this code, it was like 100 lines of code. And then I said, I'm going to do it in 50. I'm going to do it in 30. And so it actually ended up being a pretty compact set of code. Yeah. But I remember doing this, and I was kind of proud of myself at the moment.
It was a really fun exercise for us yesterday. We were going through your codes before.
Oh my gosh.
Because they're just being
oh, wow. Yeah, hopefully it wasn't embarrassing for me.
So another one for you, a mark of a good developer and the biggest learning exercise is bringing production down.
Yeah.
Have you ever brought production down?
Oh my God, yes. But the funniest story probably is a time where I didn't bring production down, but I probably should have, which was I issued a command that deleted the entire deployment in production. But the code at that point was running in a way such that everything was in memory. And for a while, it didn't know the difference. And so I remember running that command, and then I said, oh, what did I just do? And then I went out to production, and I did a listing of the file system, and the file system was completely empty. And then I went to the browser, and this was like the login system for QuickBooks Online. And so I went and did the login request, and it all worked. And I'm like, all right, this is a ticking time bomb. I got to get the code back out there. But was another instance where I actually brought the code down. I think in that day, probably some of the bigger things were, actually I created a system where there was a templating system for the login, so that based on the different kinds of QuickBooks properties, it can appear, at a different brand or a different logo or whatever. And at one point, I changed it where I think it actually used it was like an HTTP GET to actually go get the code, and I screwed up the port permissions. I thought I was cleaning up the port permissions, and I ended up shutting down the actual port that I used to go get the content, and I basically brought login down.
Seems like a rite of passage right now.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like if you haven't brought production down, you haven't lived. Back in the day, like when I joined Intuit, this will be a really dating thing. When I joined Intuit, if you broke the build, it sent an email to the entire company.
Oh no.
It said Alex broke the build, and I broke the build a couple of times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just a build failure, and not even
just a build failure. It's like the build didn't actually compile. It literally sent an email to the entire company, including Scott Cook.
I think now our infrastructure has evolved to the point where we have dedicated DevOps teams, and we have a lot of internal tooling.
Yeah.
One interesting comment I've heard online is that sometimes people get lost in these abstractions, and then they fail to understand the fundamentals beneath.
Yeah.
And that ends up giving them imposter syndrome when a problem actually happens.
Yeah.
So how should we combat this?
Well, the way you combat it is by informing yourself, right? This is what I was talking about before, that, total learner's mindset, don't trust the abstraction. That's a valuable skill either way. Somebody in the business gives you a requirement of something to implement, that's an abstraction. And that's why we say, go talk to the customer, go validate it for yourself. But yeah, in terms of feeling that you're losing maybe technical depth, which then gives you that fear of, am I not staying up to speed? That whenever you feel that, that's the moment to go deep. That's the moment to learn something. And it just goes back to the whole GenAI conversation as well, right? That those moments where you feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm falling behind, I'm not learning this thing. That's the incentive, and that's the moment to actually learn.
We have a rapid fire round for you.
Okay.
We're going to throw up a couple of memes,
okay.
and you give your 10-second reaction to them.
Okay.
Sure? Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the leap from I remember the days of like you learn a new language, and the first thing you do is write a hello world program. So yeah, I get it.
My brother recently started college, and for him it was like, how do I integrate Chat GPT into this application? And he hasn't written a hello world code. So it's everyone trying to make
jumping to the end. Yes.
Okay, next one. As a CTO, I'm incredibly curious.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's one of the reasons why if you're a great technology leader, you basically have to create a separate budget for hygiene to clean up technical debt, but also make sure that you're actually leading into growth and new features. And if you don't manage it explicitly, the unbelievable thing about investments in these areas, they have momentum. Like if you start investing in hygiene, suddenly you look down and like everyone's working on hygiene. And you're like, whoa, who's working on growth? And then you start investing in growth, and then you're like, whoa, everybody's working on growth. Who's working on hygiene? So it's an important thing to really stay on top of that.
That was very insightful. And I think we are out of time now. But
Oh no, let's keep talking. Show me more of my code.